Hey everybody, my name is La Precious and welcome to my channel. Let's talk with La Precious. So today I'm going to be talking about the Lamadama or the Grandma Spirit. So you guys know that I practice Santeria and I do talk about Santeria, Haitian Voodoo, and all things spiritual on my channel, as well as doing tutorials and reviews. So today I'm going to be talking about Lamadama or the Grandma Spirit. I'm sure to those who practice Santeria or Spiritismo, which is like Latin America spiritualism and whatnot. Pe- People from these two faiths pretty much know who Lamadama is. But to those of you who are new to African spirituality, especially with Espiritismo, Santeria, Candomblé, Palamayombe, Haitian Voodoo, and Louisiana Voodoo, I'm going to be showing you all about Lamadama as well as teaching you all about Lamadama. So Lamadama pretty much looks like a woman who is typically dark skinned. She's a little heavy set and she dresses in like a bandana, a long dress that comes down to her feet, as well as an apron. She pretty much looks like the way that the slave mothers look or the slave grandmothers look during slavery when they stayed in the home. They took care of their children or grandchildren as well as the children of the slave owners. And so a lot of times when you see Lamadama statues or even a Lamadama candle, you will see a slave woman with a bandana, with a long dress on, with a broom, and with a long apron on because that is how the slave mothers or the slave grandmothers dressed at that time. Now, the reason why this spirit, the Lamadama spirit, is venerated or has been created because slave mothers and slave grandmothers were highly respected at that time. They were highly respected because these slave mothers or the slave grandmothers pretty much had the closest connection to Africa or to the African countries that the slaves came from. Because to those of you who know about the African slave trade, it's very different when it comes to African culture when it comes to African culture preservation, because in the United States, when it came to the African slaves that were here, they didn't really keep as much of the traditions as much as the slaves in the Caribbean or in Latin America did, because the slaves who came here to the United States, they pretty much held on to some of the traditions of Africa, but then they gravitated more towards the Christian elements that were brought here by the European slave owners or the European colonizers, which is why you have hoodoo. Now, hoodoo is celebrated in mainly Southeast United States, and that's a mixture of Methodism, which is a sector of Christianity, and African spirituality, which is why in hoodoo you have the use of human body fluids such as blood and urine and hair. That comes from the African aspect because in a lot of African traditions and religions, they do use human qualities in order to get the spells to be a lot more powerful. Then you also have the use of the book of Psalms in the Bible, which comes from the Methodist Church or the Christian sector, which is what the African slaves gravitated towards. And then you have the use of candles, which is spells. Then you have the use of honey jars and different spells and different elements that are used in hoodoo, which is pretty much a combination of African and European. And I'm sure you probably have Native mixed in there as well because the Native Americans did use different elements of the earth when practicing their spiritual beliefs, such as herbs, such as paying attention to nature, like fire, water, air, as well as the earth, which is why in a lot of spells you see water, dirt, as well as human elements and air and different things of that nature. So that's pretty much what makes up hoodoo. Now, when you get to Santeria, Candomblé, and Palamayombe and Espiritismo, they're pretty much it's pretty much the same as hoodoo, but you do see a little bit more Africanism than you do in hoodoo. Now, when it comes to Santeria, Palamayombe, Spiritismo, you have more African elements that are seen than you see in hoodoo because the African elements that are seen in Latin American, African, or Afro spiritual religions, you see the use of the orishas or the orixas, which is they spell the Orishas Orixas in Brazil, as opposed to Orishas as opposed to in Cuba. Then, so that's pretty much how they do in Santeria and then in Candomblé. But when you have Palamayombe is the use of sticks. Now they do call on African spirits, but they go by different names. And the system and the structure is different than that of Candomblé and Santeria. Candomblé and Santeria are very similar. The only thing that's different is the Orisha spellings, but they still recognize Olodumare as God, Obatala as Jesus, Eshu or Ilegwa as the gatekeeper or the road opener, or Rula or Rumila, Oshun Oshun or Osun, depending on the regions, because the spelling does tend to be different. Yemaya or Yemoja, and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to Lamadama, Lamadama pretty much floats in between Santeria, Palamayom, not Palamayombe. She pretty much floats in between Santeria, Candomblé, Espiritismo, and I believe that she flows into the Venezuelan Afro spiritual sector as well. Now, I'm not sure if they call that Espiritismo, but I do know they have their own form of Espiritismo as well as other native or what you would call folk spirit religions. Now, moving along to Lamadama. As I mentioned before, Lamadama is the spirit of the slave mother or the slave grandmother. Now, the reason why she is venerated or called upon in the Spiritismo, Lukumi, or Santeria, or Candomblé is mainly because she's seen as the caregiver or the homemaker spirit. Now, a lot of people know, as well as African Americans, that African Americans can relate to Lamadama, and Latin Americans can relate to Lamadama as well because of the slave experience. But also, when you look at the African American aspect, now I can't really speak from a Latin American aspect when it comes to having a black grandmother or a black mother because I'm not Latina. So, when it comes to the African American experience with the black mother or the black grandmother, we know she's a caregiver, she's a caretaker, she provides food, clothes, and shelter for the family. She pretty much cooks the main meals or the big Sunday meal for the family, where everybody comes over and congregates or talks, or we share different ideas and elements, as well as the family structures are shared and seen and preserved and respected during dinner and in the home and things of that nature. And so that's pretty much the Lamadama spirit. Now, in the Latin American sector, they will call Lamadama Lamadama, which pretty much means the madam. But in the African American tradition, we would call her grandma or mama or big mama, because a long time ago, I'm not sure if a lot of African American families still use the term big mama. I'm sure some of them do, but in the past, we called grandma or the female matriarch of the family that kept everybody together, that took in the nieces and nephews and the other kids in the family who may have not had parents or even grandparents. We called her Big Mama. And she pretty much took care of everybody in the neighborhood or everybody within the family and passed down those important family values and structures and viewpoints to the family members. And so that's pretty much who Lama Dama is. Now, when it comes to serving or worshiping Lama Dama, the only thing that you would need is a picture, a statue, and a candle. And you could put simple offerings as well. Now, when it comes to offerings, to each its own, or it depends on your experience with her, or you may not have experience with her and you just want to warm up to her. So, I'm going to give you some examples. Now, with me, I'm experienced in the Santeria, or pretty much in the Afro Latin sectors, because I practice Santeria, and that is an Afro Latin religion. And so I'm pretty much familiar with Santeria, Lukumi, IFA, and Isese, as well as Haitian Voodoo and Louisiana Voodoo, and a little bit of Espiritismo. And I'm also aware of 21 divisions. So I pretty much have experience within that. So since I have experience, I could pretty much teach you all how to venerate Lama Dama properly. Now, whenever you're in a botanica or in a Latin American spiritual store, they will have different candles for different spirits and different saints. Now, the way that the candles are structured or designed is going to be different based on the types of candles that they get. Here, you're going to see Lama Dama depicted as a fortune teller. And on the back, when it's listed in English, it's going to say fortune teller, dreams come true. And on the back, it's going to be in Spanish. And it says sueños hechos realidad, So this is how it's going to look from the front and the back. You're going to pretty much see a woman who is dressed as a psychic, or yes, I would say she's a psychic and not so much as a gypsy, because the gypsy or the Lagitana is seen as a separate spirit as opposed to as the same as Lamadama. Now, Lamadama here is going to be depicted as a psychic. Some candles will say Lamadama, and they'll either come in these seven multicolored candles, or they'll come in red, or they'll come in orange, or they'll come in green. And usually it'll say Lamadama, and it'll have the depiction of Lamadama as the one I described, as the slave mother or the slave grandmother, the one that has the bandana tied, the one that has the long dress with the broom and with the long apron. You'll either see that depiction or this depiction on the candle. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your Florida water and you're going to cleanse the candle. You're going to say, cleanse all negative energies, negative spirits from this candle. You're going to wipe it down, because whenever you're wiping off negative energies and negative spirits, you're going to wipe it all the way down. You're going to cleanse off the top and then wipe off the bottom. So since your candles are going to be cleansed, it's going to be good to go. So you're going to put this on your altar, and then what you're going to do is you're going to snip this maybe by 1 or 2 inches so it won't be too long, and so the flame won't be jumping out of the candle. A lot of times, if you light a wick that's this long without cutting it, the extra wick will burn down with the flame and you won't have to cut it. But sometimes you may have to cut it, because some of these candles have wax all the way up the wick and may have herbs and whatnot. And a lot of times when candles are pre-prepped with oils and herbs and you light it on fire, the whole top of the candle is going to catch on fire. So to make it safer for you and a lot easier to light, just go ahead and snip it at the top by 1 to 2 inches and you'll be good to go. So then, once your candle is prepped, on the inside, the types of herbs and the types of oils that I would use to honor Lamadama would be ones that she would be able to communicate with you through and based on what she represents. Now, Lamadama represents not only a caregiver, a mother, or a grandmother, she represents wealth. She's all about making sure the household is financially stable. She's all about protection. She protects the people within the home from evil and wicked spirits and unwanted energies. She also represents family. She also represents, let's see, I said wealth, family, prosperity, and she represents abundance. And she also represents intuitiveness and psychic abilities, because grandmothers, especially in the Black community, are known for being very intuitive, very wise, very well aware, and very spiritual. So if you're in need of having more intuitiveness, or you need help with your psychic abilities or with your fortune telling skills, you could put anise. You can either take the anise star and crunch it up and sprinkle it on top of the candle, or you can buy some star anise oil and put that on top, because star anise is an herb or an oil that's used to entice or to make psychic abilities more prominent. Another thing you could use is cinnamon. Cinnamon is known to represent wealth, especially in the Latin American culture, and it's associated not only with Lamadama, but it's associated with Oshun, because Oshun is the Orisha or the African spirit of wealth. So you could put that in with the Lamadama candle as well. Now, another oil you could put in protection, which would usually be bay or rosemary. You can also put of lemon in here, lemon oil as well, because you want to make sure that the acid in that lemon is able to cut through the negative energies. Now, based on my research, and you can also put oranges. One thing I've noticed is that in the Latin American cultures, also with the Caribbean culture, they like to use a lot of different fruits and vegetables to represent different spiritual elements as well. And you will see this with Lamadama, with the Orishas, or with the Orixas, and even with the Haitian voodoo and the 21 division and the Louisiana voodoo sectors as well, when it comes to venerating and honoring those spirits. Now, another oil that you can use at the top of this would be protection oil, cinnamon oil. You could put star anise oil. Those oils tend to be the strongest. You can also put mind expansion oil, since this does deal with psychic abilities and intuitiveness. And not only that, as far as the food that you can use to honor Lamadama, you can cook like a home cooked meal. Now, for African Americans, we can cook like soul food, macaroni and cheese, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, collard greens to honor her because a lot of our grandmothers or big mamas or mamas used to cook or still do cook those meals on Sundays. Now, or for the Latin American sector, you can pretty much cook some more like African based, maybe traditional kind of foods, like fried plantains, usually tostones, or maybe I'm sorry, I forgot maduros, which would be like the sweet plantains. You could fix kalaloo, which is like an African based soup. You can make asopao. You can make black beans. You can make ropa vieja, which is pretty much shredded beef. You could do arroz con gandules, which is very similar to the rice and peas that they eat in the Caribbean, except instead of the beans, you're going to use actual peas and so on and so forth. So, those are the types of meals and the types of foods that you can use to venerate and honor La Madama. You can also put a knife. A knife is represented especially because she usually uses a knife to cut and prepare the foods, but in the spiritual aspect, she would use that knife to cut through anything that's negative, unnecessary, and unwanted. Or for the Caribbean side, you can use a machete because machetes were used in the Caribbean to cut down sugarcane as well as different plants and different crops that were gathered during slavery or not during slavery as a way of gathering food for meals or gathering crops in order for them to be shipped off to be sold to different countries to be sold in grocery stores. But above all else, the machete and the knife is used because you're cutting down what's necessary to be cut down in order to gain something that's needed. So you can use the knife, you can use the food items, and as far as the cloth, you could use like the checkered or you could use like the plaid because Lama Dama did wear the plaid headband or like the plaid skirt or the plaid dress, or you could also use a Lama Dama statue. The Lama Dama is going to be seen as, like I said, the slave mother or the slave grandmother, and at the top of her head she's going to have a basket. I've seen a lot of people with the baskets. They'll put money, they'll put either change, dollar bills, they'll put star anise in there, they'll put cinnamon in there, and they usually put like fruits and stuff because Lama Dama is represented with like the corn. A lot of times you'll see like that big corn basket that has like an overflow of fruits and vegetables that's used as a symbol of abundance. You can put some fruits and vegetables if they're small enough, depending on how the basket is. Because a lot of times, when in spiritual communities or in spiritual worship, you could get like tall saint statues, tall Orisha statues, as well as lower statues that can either be life size, the size of a human, or the size of a small figurine or fixture that we usually have in our homes. So if you have a life size one, you could put real fruits and vegetables in there. And if you have one that's like the size of like a regular size figurine for a table, then you could put maybe some fake fruits and vegetables, or you could put like some doll fruits and vegetables, whatever floats your boat, or whatever it is that you want to do for that. Now, a lot of times when I honor my spirits, I like to honor the Loas or the Orishas or the saints on their days. A lot of times with spirit veneration or with Orisha, saint, or Loa worship, you could worship them any day of the week that you want to, but I feel like in order for your spells or for your requests to be heard and taken more seriously, you need to worship them or either on their days, their feast days, which will usually be one day out of the month, or you need to worship them on the day of the planets that's representative of their abilities that they have as spirits. Now, Lama Dama is seen as the intuitive spirit, the caregiving spirit, the loving spirit, and the compassionate spirit, and whatnot. I would worship her on Sunday, and it's kind of ironic that she would be worshipped on a Sunday because of the references I made earlier about how African American mothers or grandmothers would cook Sunday dinner for the family to eat. And it's typically a day that the African American family will go to church and honor God and honor Jesus on Sundays. So I prefer that you worship her and you serve her on Sundays. Even when you go along with the Spiritismo and Candomblé and Santeria, the Orisha known as Obatala, who is seen as Jesus within the Christian or the Catholic faith, because a lot of the Afro Latin religions are synchronized or are a mix of Catholicism and African spiritualism. So that's why a lot of times you'll see the Catholic saints or Christian saints synchronized with the African saints whenever you can't find an African statue or maybe an Orisha or a Loa candle, because the slaves would use those spirits to cover up their African spirits as a way of preserving their African spirits or their African spirituality. I know in the African American community, a lot of us get offended and a lot of us don't like how we see Orisha candles or Loa candles or even spirit candles still being used by white saints or Spanish saints, because a lot of us have to understand. Now, I'm not going to negate that colorism doesn't play a part in African spirituality, especially in Latin America, because it does. Because I have done my own research, and I'll be talking about that in another video. But there is evidence of colorism and racism playing a part in African spirituality, especially in Latin America, as well as in the United States and in other parts of the Americas, and which is why you do see a lot of Orisha statues and Loa statues and candles that tend to be more Europeanized or more mixed because of the notions of colorism and racism. And I've also found out that even in religions like 21 Divisions, there's some colorism and racism mixed in there when it comes to some of the lower venerations, but I'll save that for another video. But getting back to what I explained, that is the reason why you do see white saints or white orishas on the candles, because when the slaves were slaves, they had to cover up their African religion or their African elements so that the slave masters wouldn't think that they were going against the oppression that was being oppressed on them from the Catholic Church or as well as the Christian Church. But I do understand that in 2021, we're not slaves anymore. We are free. And I do agree that in other places besides Botanica, Walmart to be an example, they should put Orisha candles instead of just the white or the Spanish Catholic candles, because I have seen where in some Walmarts they will put the white looking saints on the candles for display to be sold. And then in some Walmarts that tend to have a more Hispanic or Latin audience that comes to their Walmarts, they'll have Catholic saints on the candles that do look more Hispanic. But I do agree there does need to be a more African presence when it comes to Orisha candles or Spiritismo candles in places like Walmart, because we're not slaves anymore and we do need to be represented. So, moving along from that, I do recommend that you serve her and worship her on a Sunday, because that way, your wishes and your petitions will be heard, and you'll get a powerful impact as well. Now, I use music as well as a maraca. I use a maraca to wake up the spirits, and I use the music to wake up the spirits as a way of welcoming them in. Some people don't do that. Some people just light the candles, set up the offerings and the altar and whatnot, and just pray. If that works for you, or if that's worked for people in the past, that's fine. But one thing that I have noticed is that with my own experiences of the Orishas blessing me or giving me with what I asked, is that they really like clean, pretty altars. And they love altars that have at least two or three offerings, especially if you want to use spices and herbs as well as fruits and vegetables that will be cut up in the divisions of the number that they represent, that you sprinkle the herbs that are known with their spirit or with their power that they can give you. And they really like a lot of decoration and design, which is why a lot of times when you see people with Orisha altars or lower altars, they're decked out in jewelry, food, cakes, and whatnot, because the spirit really love elaborate offerings. But if you can't afford that much, at least try to put maybe a fruit with a sprinkle of herbs on it, or try to put maybe a knife or a machete, or maybe jewelry or a mirror that you have in your bathroom, that you can afford just a little something in order to honor them and to respect them. So that's all I have about the Lamadama spirit. And I hope you all like this video. Don't forget to like, leave a comment in the comment section, and subscribe to my channel. Have a good day.